you ever found yourself coming up with the perfect argument and finding exactly the words you should have said in the shower, 10 minutes after the actual argument ended? I suppose this is an all too familiar experience for most of us, and in this video I would like to explore why we struggle to find the right words when it matters the most. What is it about the shower that makes it an anecdotal hotspot for creativity, and the role modern culture plays in suppressing insight and original thought. During an argument or debate, it's hard to shake off the feeling of being judged and evaluated. Your focus shifts from evaluating what's being said to how you're being perceived and whether you're making a fool of yourself already. Then you start doing this thing where you can't even tell if you're defending an idea you actually believe in anymore, or if you're just trying to save face. And the more your focus narrows, the more you stumble and the weaker your arguments start to sound. But I believe there is something deeper to it than merely trying to establish your point of view as plausible. The threat almost feels existential. There is an interesting idea proposed by existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, who believed that when we make a choice, we don't just choose for ourselves. We unknowingly, by implication, choose for all mankind. Even when we make a choice about something seemingly personal, like getting married and having kids, we are implicitly declaring that this is what a human life ought to be. I explored this in more detail in another video, but basically, he makes this almost absurdly strong claim that we can't really choose what we think is worse. We always choose what we think is the best choice possible. And I think this applies for our chosen beliefs and strongly held opinions as well. They are the best explanation we've managed to assemble for how the world works and how one ought to live inside it. So when someone challenges your beliefs, it's as if they are confronting you with the possibility that you may not have made the best choice possible, that what made your world feel coherent and logical may not hold, that there exists a better way to engage with the world. The weight of that threat feels existential, which may be why one feels the urge to rush to defend their position frantically, probably for themselves more than anyone else. As you might imagine, that defensive thinking is narrow and uncreative in its nature, which is exactly the opposite of what you need when you're trying to convince someone of your mental resourcefulness. So what happens in the shower that flips that state? The phrase shower thoughts has almost become a cliché way to describe thoughts of a specific nature, wild, unusual, and sometimes representing breakthroughs in insight. There is indeed something about the shower that makes it fertile breeding grounds for newly found understanding. You could be sat at a desk for hours trying to find a solution to a problem in vain, but the moment you hit the shower, it finally hits you, and you wonder how you couldn't see it before when it's so obvious. Neuroscientists have long marveled at this phenomenon because it almost seems counterintuitive. We are taught that thinking should happen in a thinking appropriate environment, serious enough for equally serious thoughts. That's how we measure productivity. Yet our best ideas seem to come when we are not trying to be productive at all. Quite the opposite, when we are relaxed mentally and engaged in less demanding mundane activities like showering or walking. Some interesting insights on the matter come from cognitive scientist John Kounios, who studied creativity extensively. He looked at brain activity in individuals and saw regions in the right temporal lobe of the brain, right above the right ear, light up right before an aha moment was reached. Not only that, but those moments of insight were preceded by particular stillness, where the brain momentarily silences sensory input. Kounios suggested that there are certain conditions that put the mind in a state best suited for these aha moments to happen. Those include mental relaxation and a certain degree of sensory deprivation. So, a quiet environment where not much is going on. The shower, with its white tiles and equally white noise of running water, seemed to be a perfect candidate. Even more interestingly, he proposes that attention expands to fill the space allocated to it. So, if you are sitting in a small office cubicle, you are more likely to think in an analytical fashion with not much space for your mind to wander. Whereas outside on a walk, for example, your mind has a bigger space to fill and it expands to include thoughts you are less likely to consider normally. This reminds me of Nietzsche, one of the most influential thinkers we know of, and his famous refusal to trust ideas that are born in stillness. In his last work before his mental decline, Ecce Homo, he reflects on his life, his method, and his philosophical development. In the chapter titled Why I Am So Clever, he writes, remain seated as little as possible. Put no trust in any thought that is not born in the open, to the accompaniment of free bodily motion. Now you might be thinking, was he serious or was he trolling with these chapter titles? Well, both, but that's a topic for another time. Importantly, what's relevant to the topic at hand, Nietzsche didn't think philosophy is primarily a set of propositions that you arrive at by logic. He thought it's something closer to a mode of living out of which certain thoughts become possible and others become less possible or impossible. And he described the conditions under which his most influential philosophies were born, which included long walks, bodily movement, and a kind of thinking that isn't dragged out of you under pressure, but allowed to emerge by making the conditions around it favorable. Yet somehow, we still teach individuals that insight should come in controlled environments where logic and linear thinking are prized. And that bias isn't just cultural, it may also reflect a deeper imbalance in how we recruit different modes of attention in the brain. As you probably know, the right and the left hemispheres of the brain exhibit a high degree of specialization in their function. Broadly speaking, the left hemisphere is more inclined toward analytical reasoning, language, and narrow attention, whereas the right hemisphere is more concerned with holistic, intuitive understanding and creativity. But psychiatrist and philosopher Iain McGilchrist argued something far more interesting. He proposed that the right hemisphere is the master that experiences reality more directly as it is actually lived. It's context aware, imaginative, and capable of reading nuance and the unspoken reality of a situation. The left hemisphere, by contrast, is its emissary, immensely useful, even indispensable, because it can take that complex living world and convert it into simpler workable components like names, concepts, ideas, plans, maps, systems. The level of abstraction it's capable of is what ultimately enables the existence of science and technology and, to a large degree, language. But McGilchrist thinks that the problem arises when the emissary mistakes itself for the master. In other words, when the left hemisphere becomes overconfident and starts treating its representations as if they were reality, rather than simplified representations of it. He suggests that modern Western culture in particular has increasingly shifted towards a left-dominant cognitive style that favors precision and measurable, predictable systems, especially upon the dawn of the Industrial Revolution and the adoption of standardization and optimization. The result is a world that is increasingly systematized and dependent on method and measurable outcome, often at the expense of holistic insight and creativity. In other words, we've been culturally trained to assume that real thinking should look controlled and productive, even though the kind of thinking that produces breakthroughs often requires the opposite: openness and a little room for the mind to wander. This isn't to undermine the role of method and analytical thinking, but it is to say that just because one mode of mind can make plans and provide systems and reliable, predictable outcomes, it doesn't mean that it's capable of containing the full picture. McGilchrist's warning is that the emissary can look so competent that it tempts us to abandon the master, who is the one who is actually open to a vast world of insight. I suppose this was a long-winded way to say that you win arguments in the shower because you're not trying to win at all. And the absence of all that pressure and noise and judgment allows your mind to wander and make associations between distant ideas, which leads to moments of insight. Sadly enough, the conditions that allow your mind to relax and expand are often the ones that we are taught to associate with laziness or being unproductive. But perhaps it is worth rethinking our relationship to the more dull moments of the day that often prove to deliver the biggest impact.